The second major thing that you need to develop good understanding of Islam is you need to go in stages. So you need in each one of those sciences to start at the very beginning. And one of the biggest problems we have is we switch on YouTube, we listen to a lecture, but that lecture may well not be at the beginning of what that person needs to start the topic off. So they're listening to a lecture about hadith, but there is a chunk of material that they haven't studied from the beginning of the topic. Not from the book specifically, but in terms of books themselves, you can think of it like a bookshelf. On this bookshelf, each shelf represents a topic in Islam. So you have a shelf for belief, a shelf for hadith, a shelf for tafsir, a shelf for fiqh, a shelf for usul al-fiqh, a shelf for the science of hadith, and so on. On each shelf, you have to order the books from easy to difficult. And what happens is often if you start reading books from the middle of the shelf, you get confused because those books are based upon what has preceded from the beginning of the bookshelf. And so it's really important when you learn Islam that you start at the beginning in each topic. And that's difficult. It requires you to be almost a connoisseur of Islamic sciences and knowledge, not just somebody who picks out a YouTube video and says, I'll watch this. That's fine if you just want general topics to raise your iman, but it's not going to give you detailed understanding of Islam. It's not going to give you precise knowledge of what Islam is and what Islam isn't. It's only just going to give you a bit of knowledge about something, which is, it's kind of like ripping a page out of one of the books and, sticking it on your wall. There's a bit of knowledge there, but you don't have the context of where that knowledge belongs and how it links to the knowledge that came before it and the knowledge that's coming after it. So you have to be strict with yourself and you have to start at the very beginning. And what you want at the beginning is you want a book which gives you an overview of the topic and introduces you to terminology. This is what you really want. You want a book that gives you an overview of the topic, as in it gives you a brief, like sort of a bird's eye view of the topic you're going to study, and it gives you terminology, because each one of these sub-sciences has its own terminology. And let me just give you an example. The word sunnah has maybe 7 or 8 different meanings. In every science, it means something different. So if you hear a scholar of Aqeedah or you're reading a book of Aqeedah, a book of creed about Islam, belief, and they talk about sunnah, then the sunnah means the opposite of bid'ah, the opposite of innovation. Sunnah meaning having the belief, the correct belief, as opposed to an innovated and introduced belief. If you see the word sunnah in a book of hadith, then it means what was reported from the Prophet ﷺ, from his statements and actions and approvals and his description. If you see the word sunnah in a book of fiqh, then often what it means are those things which you are rewarded for doing, but you are not under a threat of punishment if you don't do them, yani voluntary acts. So have you noticed that each time we go to a different science, the word means something different? And so what you need from your introductory book is a bit of terminology and a bird's eye view of what that subject looks like and what that subject something to get you almost like, I would describe it like a bunch of keys. What you need in the beginning is a bunch of keys. What I mean by that, something small that you can hold, each one of them will open a door of information. Each one of them will open a door. And what's behind that door are volumes and volumes of information. But all you just have is a little key. You remember the key and you have access to the door and everything that's behind it. So for example, give you a simple example. When you memorize the names of Allah, You memorize the names of Allah. And maybe you memorize them in some sort of poetry form where you can keep them in your memory easily. Each one of those names opens a volume of information which you can remember and you can have stored in your memory. You don't have to memorize that whole volume of information. You only need to memorize the name, and the name unlocks a part of your memory which has lots of, sort of information in it. And from there you can memorize a small amount and get access to a big amount. So this is what you want from a beginner's level book. What you don't want from a beginner's level book are differences in opinion. You definitely don't want to know that this person said that it's black and this person said that it's white, because that is going to lead to you getting confused. You want one opinion, and you don't want a lot of complexity. You don't want it to be really complicated. You want a basic, nice introductory book that gives you terminology, gives you an overview, doesn't give you any differences of opinion, and doesn't overcomplicate things for you. Something you can refer back to again and again. And often it's the case that we actually memorize that initial book. Some of those initial books are so succinct and so compressed and easy to understand that you can actually memorize that first book.
You relate to whatever you will learn
and whatever you learn later will relate to something that you have memorized from that initial text and that initial book. As you progress on, you're going to first of all need to understand the evidence. So that's probably in the intermediate level. You would have a book that not only tells you what to do or an introduction to the topic, but gives you some of the evidence, a little bit more complexity. And then you progress to a book that gives you some differences of opinion, maybe has some incorrect opinions in it, which you have to unravel and unlock, and so on and so on. As you go through the stages, the complicated books become easy because they're built upon things that you have already understood and you've already taken on board. This now brings me to the third important point.